adjudicator is Miss Cheng Yao. The topic of this debate is that Mack Horton protest should be launched. The affirmative team seated to my right is from St. Peter's Girls' School. The negative team seated to my left is from Southern Vales Christian College. The speaking time for this debate is 4 minutes. A single warning bell will sound 1 minute before the speaking time. A double bell will sound at the speaking time. A continuous bell may be rung 30 seconds after the speaking time, in which this case the speaker must sit down immediately. Please ensure that your mobile phones and other electronic devices are switched off. I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Sarah Blight.
Good evening, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of the debate is that Mack Horton's protest should be lauded. We, the affirmative team, believe this statement is true. Mack Horton is an Australian gold medalist swimmer, and at the recent FINA World Aquatic Championships, he refused to stand next to Sun Yang on the podium, who is currently facing allegations of doping rule violations that could result in a ban from the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. We define Mack Horton's protest as him standing behind the podium. We define lauded as being worthy of praise or applause. My first point relates to the appalling history of doping in competitive swimming, and that Mack Horton merely represents the thousands of athletes who want to take a stand against the use of drugs in competitive swimming. My second point is that the failure of the International Swimming Federation, also known as FINA, needs to be addressed. Our second speaker, Angel, is stating that Mack Horton has the right to peacefully protest as stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. She is also examining the power of one person to make significant change. Our third speaker, Emma, is rebutting the opposition's case and summing up our team's case. My first point tonight is relating to the appalling history of doping in competitive swimming, and that Mack Horton merely represents the thousands of athletes who want to take a stand against the use of performance-enhancing drugs. The history of doping in swimming takes us way back to the 1970s, when the Germans used testosterone and other extreme drugs, therefore were banned for a year. There have been multiple cases across the years as well. This includes the Russian scandal in 2016, when the team had in fact been doping and had been restricted from certain events instead of a complete national ban. Even a Russian lawyer stated that you're not a thief unless they catch you. If you're guilty, it should be proven with significant evidence. Russia has committed the biggest doping scandal in swimming history and will welcome back. This is unfortunately how the problem is being dealt with in the swimming industry. This soft feather duster approach to banning drug cheats has done nothing to prevent further use. Mack Horton is clearly just peacefully protesting on behalf of many athletes who support clean sport. My second point is that the failure of FINA needs to be addressed. FINA, instead of stopping doping once and for all, is bowing down and letting swimmers walk all over them. FINA's disastrous handling of the supersuit era in the 2000s, coupled with this doping problem, became a slow march for swimmers and coaches to make change. Another failure of FINA was when they named Sun Yang Swimmer of the Year in 2014 after his first doping offence. As well as this, they let Yulia Ufimova swim in the 2016 Olympics despite anti-doping violations. Mack Horton's protest should be supported by the public, as he isn't just protesting Sun Yang, but he is taking a stand against a significant doping problem and forcing FINA to face the decisions to ultimately end this issue once and for all. So, in conclusion, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, clearly this is a very serious issue surrounding performance-enhancing drugs in swimming. As I've outlined in my speech, Mack Horton's protest was peaceful, and he is taking a stand against the unjust nature of Sun Yang's reinstatement in order to bring the issue to light. Therefore, his protest should be lauded. Thank you.
I call upon the first negative speaker, Samantha Dixon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, adjudicator. The topic for our debate is that Mack Horton's protest should be lauded. We, the negative team, strongly believe that his showcase of disgraceful sportsmanship and disrespectful behaviour shouldn't be lauded. We agree with the definition that the affirmative team has given, but we would like to add that lauded means highly praised. As our first speaker, I'll be talking about how Mack Horton's protest has promoted disgraceful sportsmanship and is highly disrespectful. Our second speaker will demonstrate how Mack Horton's protest was purely based on unproven assumptions and how ignorant Mack Horton really was. He will also be addressing how strong a word lauded is to be describing ignorant and disrespectful behaviour towards not only Sun Yang, but also FINA's code of conduct. Our third speaker will rebut and sum up our case. So, the first affirmative speaker has claimed that Mack Horton is standing up for fairness in sport and trying to make a difference. Well, Australia isn't completely clean either, as evidence in Shire Jack being tested positive for Lucindrol, a drug, and this happened after Horton's protest. So Mack Horton made a protest during a victory ceremony. By Mack Horton making this silent protest, he achieved and promoted something we all call bad sportsmanship and disrespect. As proof of this, Article 3 of FINA's, the International Swimming Foundation Code of Conduct, states that competitors shall actively participate in the full conduct of the competition, including victory ceremonies and, if applicable, presentation and/or press conferences. They shall strictly avoid any offensive or inappropriate behaviour towards the officials and the other competitors, the team members, and/or the spectators during the entire conduct of the competition. Any political, religious, or discriminatory statements or behaviour is strictly prohibited. He is not only representing bad sportsmanship to other nations and competitors, but he is disrespecting FINA, and he is competing in their competition. By not standing up on the podium next to Sun Yang, he is disrespecting their code of conduct for a completely unnecessary silent protest that has no place at this podium. His actions can and will rub off on other competitors. An example of this is Duncan Scott, who did the exact same thing 2 days after Horton. He did not share the podium with Sun Yang, and yet again not following the code of conduct. Now, you might bring up the argument that they are protesting for what they believe in. Well, this might be true, but it certainly doesn't make it right. Competitors who are protesting are not only completely ignoring FINA's code of conduct, but if more protests take place, they will make the podium a place of protest and not a place of celebrating others' achievements. This that they've worked so many years to achieve. If competitors want to stand up for what they believe in, then they can go ahead and do it somewhere else, where it is more appropriate, such as expressing his opinions before the swim. His actions and disrespect towards FINA and their code of conduct is showcasing a lack of sportsmanship and respect. Is this the type of behaviour we want to be promoting as a nation? How would you feel if you worked for a decade to achieve your dreams of becoming a professional athlete, and then the day you win a competition, it gets ripped away from you, and people tear you down based on an unproven assumption? His actions are based purely on assumptions, and therefore shouldn't be lauded, as our next speaker will clearly demonstrate. So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in summary, we the negative team strongly insist that Mack Horton's protests should not be lauded. Why would you laud a disgraceful lack of sportsmanship and an incredibly disrespectful behaviour? Especially when that behaviour is prohibited in a code of conduct, which Mack Horton has no right to disobey. This is not behaviour that should be lauded, but is behaviour that should be discouraged. The issue of drugs in sport is too serious to be clouded by assumptions. Thank you.
Call upon the second affirmative speaker, Angel Lee.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Before I discuss my points on the right of peaceful protest and how the power of one person can make a change, I will rebut what the negative team have already discussed tonight. The first negative speaker has tried to tell you how Mack Horton has disgraceful sportsmanship. These athlete activists should be applauded. They now have the world's attention. Swimming Australia uttered public support for Horton's stand. Athletes have the right to freedom of expression. The actions of Horton and those who have followed his example have brought to the sport not only issues of equality, but also of athletes' right to freedom of expression. Swen Yang has had a previous history of cheating in his past, which include taking the drug trimetazidine, smashing a blood vial with a hammer, and refusing to have a sample of his urine tested during an unannounced test. Doping makes the sport less meaningful and gives other competitors an unfair advantage. Sport is all about competing based off of skill. Allowing dope would eliminate the importance of skill and training. Our first speaker has already stated the appalling history of doping in swimming and how Venus failures should be addressed. Today, I'll be talking to you about 2 points in relation to the right of peaceful protest and how the power of one action can make significant change. My first point relates to the fact that Mack Horton has the right of peaceful protest, as stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in December 1948. The right to protest is a human right, arising out of a number of recognized human rights. Today, this right is recognized in the constitutions of 182 countries. However, we are still far away from universal acceptance of this right in practice. There is, of course, nothing inherently good or bad about the causes pursued through peaceful protest. It has been used, for example, to foster acceptance for many fundamental human rights. When a society permits people to air their grievances and opinions in a peaceful way, it allows public engagement with the matter and creates a powerful tool for tensions to be resolved in a peaceful manner. This is an integral part of a democratic and pluralistic society. When an individual, Mack Horton in this case, is willing to risk his reputation, livelihood, sponsorships, and prize money, etc., and to subject himself to ridicule and penalty for the good of the sport, that individual deserves our recognition, applause, and therefore should be lauded. My second point relates to how the power of one person can make significant change. Venus failures must be addressed if any progress regarding the sport is going to be made. Swimmers frustrated by a long history of inaction and failure have to force change when change is not forthcoming. The change will only occur if individuals, such as Mack Horton, stand up and point out the failings of the system. It is up to the athletes themselves to demand change. The claim that Horton has brought the sport into disrepute is ridiculous. It is the cheat who are bringing the sport into disrepute. Sport can and should be a vehicle for progressive social change. The best use of the winner's podium to make a statement is the right to protest, forcing change. The outpouring of support for Horton from fellow competitors made it abundantly clear that many swimmers no longer believe the sport's peak body, FINA, is acting in their best interests. Regardless whether Horton is a righteous crusader or unfairly targeting the Chinese swimmer, such a lack of support is why athletes feel abandoned by those they naively expect to protect their sport. Athletes from around the world have spoken up, and yet again, they have been shut out and not listened to. So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we, the affirmative team, strongly believe that Mack Horton's protest should be lauded, as he has the right of peaceful protest to demand clean sport and the power of one can make significant change. Thank you.
call upon the second negative speaker, Daniel Baker.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, Adjudicator, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that Mack Horton's protest should be lauded. We, the negative team, are certain that this should not be the case. The first affirmative speaker has attempted to persuade you that athletes have the right to freedom of expression. Well, yes, they may have rights to that, however, that must be conducted in an appropriate manner. Just because Mack has the right to express his opinion doesn't mean he won't have consequences for it, especially having no proof behind that. The way he protested was against the code of conduct. Should we justify breaking those rules? They have also tried to convince you that Sun smashing the blood vials looks suspicious. Well, while Sun Yang may look suspicious smashing the blood vials with a hammer, let me ask you this. Would you want 3 said to be accredited doping officers taking your blood for a random routine check, which is suspicious in itself? You are then asked to sign a contract where you see abnormalities when you ask them about it, and you don't get a straight answer. Sun Yang had every right to deny those unaccredited testers his blood, as there would always be the risk of messing with the samples and making him look guilty. Besides, if your coach and lawyer advised that you not let them take your blood vials, would you not listen? Who knows what might have happened to those? At least this is what happened to Sun Yang. They've also tried to convince you that Sun Yang's past will inevitably cause Sun Yang to make the same mistake. Well, what right do we have to assume that he will make the same mistake? We acknowledge that there is always a possibility. However, don't you think that serving a 3-month ban from something you've dedicated your entire life to will discourage you from doing that again? Our first speaker has already made it clear that refusing to share the podium showcased terrible sportsmanship and was incredibly disrespectful. She brought up the FINA Code of Conduct and how Horton's behaviour completely violated it. Is this behaviour that we should be lauding? Should the fact that he disrespected Sun Yang and FINA without any evidence be lauded? I, as our second speaker, will be talking to you about the sheer ignorance Horton displayed through his protest and how this unjustified behaviour is not worthy to be lauded. What right did Mack Horton have to prejudge Sun Yang? Accusing Sun Yang of being a drug cheat through the action of not standing on the podium with him without having any evidence was showing sheer ignorance towards the issue. There has been no evidence of Yang being guilty of being a drug cheat, as the evidence has not proven him innocent or guilty yet. Therefore, his accusation could only have come from assumptions. Horton was asked about it and said, I quote, "I am not going to share the podium with someone who behaves like Sun Yang." This implies that Horton is making assumptions out of Sun Yang's past. How is this fair? It is, however, ignorant. The only way Mack would have proof is by knowing him personally and or spending time with him outside of sport, or seeing him take drugs. Horton has not and did not state that this was the case, and has made it safe to say that he did not see any of this. His accusations without evidence are just as laughable as people standing up for hundreds of centuries saying that the earth is flat, even though we have evidence that it's not. It is complete ignorance to assume with no evidence, and which is exactly what Horton did. My second point is that we shouldn't be lauding behaviour like this. As our first speaker made clear and obvious, Mack Horton's protest went against the Code of Conduct and was despicably unjust behaviour we should not be encouraging in sport. Horton is accusing Yang of being a drug cheat without evidence to back up his claims. Lauded is a word that means highly praised. Using this word to describe Horton's actions is praising bad sportsmanship and ignorance. Now that is clearly not the best possible behaviour. It is not even worthy to be called good behaviour, let alone to be lauded. We cannot say that ignorance and unproven assumptions towards people is good quality behaviour that people should be known for. Richard Ings, the former CEO of ASIDA, Australian Sport Anti-Doping Authority, offered a reminder that Sun Yang is innocent until proven guilty, and neither of those things have happened yet. Ings also suggested that he should receive penalties for this. To say that behaviour said to be inappropriate by the former CEO of ASIDA should be lauded and followed is absurd. It means that anybody can accuse anybody for any reason with the slightest suspicion without evidence to publicly disrespect them. Is this what should be lauded? So, adjudicator, Madam...
call upon the third affirmative speaker, Emma Paul.
Good evening, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. As the third speaker for the negative team tonight, I will rebut the opposition's case against the fact that Mack Horton's protest should be lauded and sum up our team's argument. The negative team has used three main points as the foundation of their argument. Their first point focuses on the idea that other athletes from Australia have doped. It is true that other athletes from Australia such as Shane and Jack took drugs, but this point is flawed as immediate action was taken, unlike Yang. Jack was suspended from the team and was unable to train with them in their lead up to the Olympics in Japan. Sun Yang was merely left off the hook and continued to compete, regardless of the allegations against him. Mack Horton is protesting against swimmers being able to compete, and he wants the swimming government to come down stronger on drug cheats and follow up on any allegations made against athletes to ensure a cleaner swimming community. The negative team raised the idea that Horton's silent protest ignores FINA's code of conduct. This is flawed because, as indicated by our second speaker, every athlete has the right to protest. In fact, their voices must be heard for change to happen in the unclean swimming community. However, these days, for them to make a difference and to be heard, it needs to grab media attention. For Horton, directing the protest at FINA and all drug cheats was the best way to make some noise. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, athletes have a responsibility to respect the FINA regulations, but that responsibility is not more important than publicly opposing those who might be seeking a chemically enhanced advantage. The protest is not a personal attack, nor is it an attack on China. It is not an attack at all. It is a peaceful protest calling for a change in sport, a call for clean sport. Although Yang may have found it personally disrespectful, his feelings are not as important as ensuring a cleaner future for swimming and indeed other sports. She goes on to say that more protests would happen during award ceremonies. This is flawed because FINA would be finally forced to take action due to the threat of protests, which achieves the goal Horton was going for, to stop unclean sport. Like my second speaker explained, one action has the power to change FINA's attitude toward clean sport. When rebutting our point about the blood vials, the second speaker used a rhetorical question, which is a fallacy as it appeals to the audience's emotions. He continued to use rhetorical questions throughout the speech. Our first speaker spoke to you about the appalling history of doping in competitive swimming and how Mack Horton merely represents the thousands of athletes who want to take a stand against the use of drugs in competitive swimming. Restricting people from competing is a soft feather duster approach to banning drug cheats, which has done nothing to prevent further use. She also explained how the failure of FINA and other organisations needs to be addressed to ensure a cleaner community in swimming. Our second speaker spoke to you about how Mack Horton has the right to peacefully protest as stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and using these rights to go up against clean sport should be lauded. She also discussed how the power of one person can still make a change. So, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, our team believes that Mack Horton's protest should be lauded as he utilised his human right to protest to address the failures of FINA and other organisations to prevent a longer history of doping in sport, and more specifically, swimming. Thank you.
call upon the third negative speaker, Rockland Dornford.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, Adjudicator, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that Mack Horton's protest should be lauded. We, the negative team, without a doubt, believe that this statement is invalid. The first affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that it will take a stand against drugs. This is wrong, because if it's been going on for that long, what makes you think it'll stop? Cheaters will find a way over the barriers and under the barriers. She also stated that it will be. The second affirmative speaker tried to convince you that Mack Horton has a right of freedom of speech and that justifies his protest. Well, he does have the right to accuse Sun Yang he doesn't have the right to accuse Sun Yang without evidence. Don't we believe in innocent before proven guilty? As we said in the Code of Conduct, he was not allowed to do that in that time or space. She also stated that how the power of one person can change FINA. Yes, this is right, but there are better ways to protest. For example, before the race, and that wouldn't have made him looking so arrogant and embarrassing in Australia. The third affirmative speaker, while trying to rebut you, contradicted herself. She said that the allegations against Sun Yang should be a ban, and then she went to say that it was just merely a feather duster. Our first affirmative speaker has clearly stated that Mack Horton made an unnecessary protest during a victory ceremony. He promoted something we like to call bad sportsmanship and disrespect. She mentioned the FINA Code of Conduct, and the Mack Horton clearly went against it. He not only disrespected himself, his country, but also FINA. Duncan Scott, who did the same thing to Sun, an event later, they were both showcasing a lack of sportsmanship and respect. Do we really want to make the podium a place for protest and not for celebrating others' achievements? Our second speaker has clearly asked an important question. What right did Mack have to prejudge Sun Yang? Accusing him of being a drug cheat without any evidence is sheer ignorance. Sun has not yet been proven guilty, therefore Mack's accusations are only assumptions. So in Mack's case, he has a suspicion, but that doesn't always mean he's correct. It is sheer ignorance for him not to look at the evidence and make unfair assumptions. Our second speaker has also very clearly stated that the protest was not in the line of code and conduct, and that it is accusing Sun without any evidence. This behaviour should not be lauded. In other words, we are saying that we should praise bad sportsmanship and ignorance. We cannot even call this behaviour good, let alone lauded. It is saying that anybody can accuse anyone, even if they have a suspicion because they have a bad past in crime or cheating. Should that really be lauded? So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, Adjudicator, in conclusion, would Mack Horton have still stood his same moral stand if he had come first place? Thank you.